Someone in this town is going to die, and the river is already warning them. The crying starts just after midnight, from the same bend in the water, and those who hear it say, icy fingers brush their shoulders, even when they are alone. And every night, the weeping comes closer to the houses. Welcome to Lost Delivery. Mexico's Weeping Woman. In the kitchen at dusk, Elena pauses at the sink when a faint woman's sob drifts in from the river beyond the houses. Mateo dismisses it as whine through the reeds, and Elena quietly shuts the window, but felt unsettled by how human the sound felt. Near midnight in their bedroom, the crying returns, longer and louder than before, rising and breaking like someone grieving, just beyond the streetlights. Elena listens in silence, while Mateo keeps his eyes closed, and the sound lingers far too steadily to be mistaken for wind. The next morning, Camila admits she followed the sound to the footpath, and felt something cold graze her shoulder, before the crying stopped instantly. When she lowers her collar, faint pale streaks remain on her skin, thin and curved like fingers. That afternoon, on his shaded porch, Don Ricardo listens and says, "The weeping woman no longer pulls people into the water, she touches them, and afterward death finds another way." Mateo rejects the idea, but no one explains the marks that were found on Camila's shoulder. Late that night on the narrow footpath by the river, Mateo walks alone to prove the story wrong, sweeping his phone light across reeds, as the crying begins again in the downstream. When the beam reaches the water, the reflection beneath the bridge appears longer than the shadow above it, stretching toward him, instead of stretching away. At midnight, on the slick river stones, the crying shifts behind Mateo, though the water in front of him remains completely still. A cold pressure closes briefly around his wrist, not pulling, only resting, and when he turns, he catches only the faint outline of white fabric, dissolving into the dark. Before dawn in the living room, when Elena asks about the pale streaks on his hand, Mateo insists he slipped, and soon after, frost-like markings form around his wrist, where no water touched him. While outside, the river becomes unnaturally silent, for that hour. The following night along the street near the river, neighbors step outside as the crying echoes closer than before, moving between houses, instead of staying at the bend. Under fixed streetlights, their shadows stretch thin and elongated, towards the water. At 2:30 a.m. in the Morales backyard, Elena grips the fence and finally sees a pale woman walking on water, and after walking a few steps, the women stood ankle-deep at the river's edge, where the current should be flowing. The figure remains still, her hair drifting as if submerged, and the weeping comes from the air around her, rather than from her mouth. Before dawn in the town clinic parking lot, Camila collapses without warning, her skin cold despite the humid air, while Mateo feels the numbness in his marked wrist, spreading slowly. And as the first light touches the river, the crying continues faintly from the bend, unchanged and waiting to mark the next target. La Llorona was never marking them for death. The icy touch was her warning, because every person she grazed was standing on land the river would soon reclaim. If you lived in this town and heard her crying tonight, would you ignore it, or listen to what the river is trying to tell you? Comment your answer, and follow to see who she warns next, because this was just a beginning.